All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to talk about rational equations and solving rational equations. In this section, you're going to learn the definition of a rational function and how to solve a rational equation. So rational equations are any equation that involve fractions, particularly when variables are in the denominator. We want to follow these steps to solve rational equations. The first thing you want to do is factor all the denominators. We're then going to use the components of the denominator to determine the least common denominator. Multiply every term by the least common denominator, and then solve the resulting equation. It'll either be linear or quadratic or in some form that you know how to solve. And then check your answer to make sure that it does not give 0 in any denominator. If your answer gives you 0 in any denominator, then it's no solution. It doesn't work. Can't divide by 0. So even if you get an answer, you have to check and make sure it doesn't give you 0 in the denominator. So the best way to go through this is just to try some examples. We want to solve this equation. 1 over 4 plus 1 over 5 equals 1 over x. So we don't have to factor any of these denominators. They're all factored. So the next thing we need to do is figure out the least common denominator. When none of the denominators share common factors, and none of these share common factors, 4 is 2 times 2, 5 is prime, and x is x. When none of the denominators share common factors, then the least common denominator can be found by just multiplying all of the denominators. So in this case, none of them share any common factors, so the least common denominator is just 4 times 5 times x, or 20x. Now that we have the least common denominator, we can multiply every term by the least common denominator, and that will get rid of the fractions. And so what we have is 1 over 4 plus 1 over 5 equals 1 over x. And we want to multiply by 20x, 20x, and 20x. So notice here, 20x times 1 divided by 4, we essentially get 20 divided by 4, which leaves 5 times x. In the second term, we get 20 divided by 5, which leaves 4x. And in the final term, x divided by x, those cancel out, and we're just left with 20. And so by finding the least common denominator and multiplying everything, we've gotten rid of all the fractions. Now we just need to solve this equation. 5x plus 4x is 9x equals 20. Divide both sides by 9, and we get x equals 20 over 9. Now the last step is just to plug this back in and make sure that it doesn't give you 0 in the denominator. And notice that if we plug in 20 over 9 for x, we're not going to get 0 in the denominator. Let's try another one. X plus 2 over 4 minus x minus 1 over 5 equals 15. Now here, the only denominators we have are 4 and 5. And so the least common denominators is just 20. And so we want to multiply everything by 20. And again, 20 divided by 4 will leave us with 5. And so we have 5 times x plus 2 minus 20 divided by 5 will leave us with 4, so that's 4 times x minus 1 equals 20 times 15 is 300. And now we can solve this equation. Distribute the 5, we get 5x plus 10 Distribute the negative 4, and we get minus 4x plus 4. Be careful in spots like this. It's a good spot to make a sign mistake. That minus sign will distribute to both terms. And then that's equal to 300. When we add our like terms, 5x minus 4x is just x. 10 plus 4 is 14, equals 300. And then we just subtract 14 from both sides, and we get x equals 286. We would then just plug that back in to check and make sure it didn't give us 0 in any denominator. And since there are no x values in the denominator, then there's no way it can give us 0 in the denominator. Here's another one. This time we now have multiple factors in our denominators. So we want to start off by factoring the denominator. So we've got 2 over 5x plus 5 minus 3 over x squared minus 1, 4 times x minus 1. And so let's factor the denominators. And what we get is 2 over 5 times x plus 1 by just factoring a 5 out, minus 3 over x plus 1 times x minus 1. X squared minus 1 is a difference of squares. And that's equal to 4 times x minus 1. So now we want to find the least common denominator. Well, the least common denominator is going to include one of every factor. And so we get 5 times x plus 1 times x minus 1. And that's our least common denominator. We're then going to multiply every term by that. We've got 2 over 5 times x plus 1 minus 3 over x plus 1 x minus 1 equals 4 over x minus 1. And we want to multiply every term by 5, x plus 1, and x minus 1. So now the factors in the denominators are going to cancel. 5 and 5 cancel. X plus 1 and x plus 1 cancel. And what we're left with is just 2 times x minus 1. 2 times x minus 1. Minus, here the x plus 1's cancel, x minus 1's cancel. We're left with 5 times 3, which is 15. Here the x minus 1's cancel. And we're left with 4 times 5, which is 20, times x plus 1. Now this equation is much simpler to solve. Distribute, we get 2x minus 2 minus 15 equals 20x plus 20. And so that's 2x minus 17 is equal to 20x plus 20. Subtract 20x from both sides. Add 17 to both sides. We get negative 18x is equal to 37. And then divide by negative 18. And you get x is negative 37 over 18. Now we want to go back and plug this in and make sure it doesn't give us 0 in the denominator. But as you can see from your factors, there's no way to get 0 by just adding or subtracting 1 to that fraction, so we're not going to get 0 in the denominator. Let's try another example. So this time, we want to start off by factoring our denominators. And for the first two terms, there's no denominator to factor. but the last term, x squared minus 16, that's a difference of squares. And so we want to factor that one. That's going to be x plus 4 and x minus 4. And so to determine our least common denominator, we're just going to use one of each of the factors. So x minus 4 and x plus 4. And then we're going to multiply every term by that. And so what we get is x minus 4 times x plus 4 times x over x minus 4 minus x plus 4 minus x minus 4 times x plus 4 times 4 over x plus 4 equals x plus 4 times x minus 4 times 32 over x plus 4 and x minus 4. And so now these factors will both cancel, and we're left with on this side just 32. On the left, the x minus 4's cancel, and we're left with x times x plus 4 minus, here the x plus 4's cancel, and we're left with 4 times x minus 4 equals 32. And so now we want to simplify this by distributing. We get x squared plus 4x. We're then going to distribute the negative 4. And so minus 4x plus 16 equals 32. 4x minus 4x then adds to 0. And so those terms go away. And we're left with x squared plus 16 is equal to 32. Notice this is a quadratic equation, but we can solve it using the square root property. So just subtract 16 from both sides. You get x squared is equal to 16. We can then take the square root, and we get x is equal to 4 and negative 4. Remember that quadratics will have two solutions. So we have two solutions to this equation. But also remember that we need to check them. And so if we go back to the original equation, you'll see that in the denominator we have x minus 4 and x plus 4. Well, if x is positive 4, and we plug in positive 4 here, we get 4 minus 4, and that goes to 0, so we can't use that answer. And so it can't be positive 4. And so if we look at negative 4, and we go back to the beginning of the problem, and we plug in negative 4 here, then we get negative 4 plus 4, and that goes to 0. And so we can't use that answer either. And so you have to check your answers, because if none of them work, then there's no solution to the problem. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to please solve rational equations.